if you find a way to give yourself both unconditional love and safety, all of a sudden you're able to remove yourself from the stresses of what happens. Everything now gets framed as an opportunity.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. V, triple board certified MD and performance and longevity expert. And on today's podcast, I bring one of the pioneers in longevity medicine and who's actually doing the clinical work. Many of you know that I actually get a chance to consult with some of the top athletes, corporations, celebrities, in the world in the field of longevity and performance and how to elevate health, happiness, and human potential. And over the last few years, I've actually narrowed my concierge practice down to focus more on speaking, on more spreading the message of longevity. Now, the people that I know that actually has great clinical work and data behind their centers are few. I've actually been asked to be CEO or become medical director of many of these centers around. And so I've got a chance to see what practices look like. This practice is nothing that I've seen before, and it's very comprehensive. There's not many clinics that I recommend for people, but this is one of them. It's Gladden Longevity. We're going to speak with the founder and the lead clinician in Gladden Longevity, Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, in a minute. But before we get into the podcast, if you are new to the Thrive State Podcast, welcome in. This is really a place where we have conversations with the thought leaders in health, happiness, and human potential so that you can have the mindsets, the tips, the strategy, the tool, the tactics for you to live your best life. We are here for a very short period of time. And yes, we could extend it with the things that we do, but why are we doing it? And how are we doing it? Are we doing it with more energy? Are we doing with the health and vitality that we have to carry our mission up? This is what this podcast really is for. And so welcome in. If this is your first time, please subscribe to the podcast and engage with the podcast because it will help the show grow. And if you haven't already, please help this podcast grow by sharing it with your friends and family, leaving us a 5-star review wherever podcasts are heard. That's really going to help us out. In addition, if you don't already know, we are having a huge mental health summit with some amazing speakers, including Zach Williams, the son of Robin Williams, Case Kenny, Ben Nimton, Vishen Lakhiani, Dave Asprey. Is a huge list, and it's going to be a free event. The thought leaders and experts in mental health. It's the Thrive State Summit. Check out thrivestatesummit.com to register entirely for free. And if you haven't already, pick up a copy of my book at thrivestatebook.com. It really gives you the resources to take your life to the next level. And if you're just joining us, if you're just figuring out who I am and want to get to know our work a little bit more, there are free breathwork exercises, longevity resources, ebooks in a big bundle resource you can get at thrivestatebreath.com. So for free resources, go to thrivestatebreath.com. Now on to our guest today. Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, born in 1954, has an internal biology of a 30 to 40-year-old man. How is he able to do this? Well, with all the tools and techniques and the practices, the mindsets of longevity. He wants people to live young forever. Some would call it a miracle, others call it longevity medicine. Being a cardiologist for over 25 years, he's actually brought the latest cutting edge technologies to his patients regularly. And he shares a very similar story as myself. At the age of 50, regardless of all of his successes, he started to feel run down with less energy and started to feel depressed, struggling to do things that used to be easy. So he went in for medical testing. And after extensive testing, he was told everything checks out, you're just getting older. Why don't you take an antidepressant? This is what sparked a burning desire to figure out what was wrong and to be able to not only elevate himself, but other people around the world, not only to live longer, but to live better. Today, he's the founder of Gladden Longevity, and he and his longevity staff create individualized health, rejuvenation, and longevity plans for each and every client, helping them navigate the symphony of longevity to maximize vitality, quality of life, and impact. When he's not at work, he has a super active and physical life. He goes surfing, mountain biking, hiking, snowboarding, and spending time with his loved ones. If you check out his Instagram page, you'll just see how fit he is and how active he is. And I'm also not going to forget to mention he plays a killer guitar. His grandmother was actually right that he's not growing old, he's just growing better and better, loving every moment of the journey. You're going to enjoy this conversation with my good friend, Dr. Jeffrey Gladden. Dr. Jeffrey Gladden, welcome to the Thrive State Podcast.
Hey, Kien, great to be here. Thanks, man. I think I saw you earlier today, if I'm not mistaken.
We are seeing each other a lot because I feel like we are two very kindred spirits. We're going to get into your background in a second, but both people, traditional doctors, and had recognized the limitations in traditional medicine, which is where I want to take this conversation later today. But before we get into that, the people who are familiar with the show understand we go through a game show style format called the 5 to Thrive. 5 questions, 1,000 points each to get to know you better. That has nothing to do with longevity.
Okay.
And if you win this, that means I owe you a meal the next time I see you.
Okay.
So it will probably either be at RadFest where we're both speaking together, or maybe sometime before that if I have the opportunity to see you. So here we go.
All right.
Dr. Gladden, are you ready to play the 5 to Thrive?
I guess I am.
Question number 1.
Yeah.
As a child, what did you want to be growing up?
A race car driver.
Oh, so good. Question number 2. If you could travel back to any history in time, which period would you choose?
Well, really, I'd be more interested to travel into the future. I think if I could go forward, 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, I'd be super curious about that. But if I was going to go back in time, I'd probably go back in time to some of the deep spiritual, thinkers on the planet, the Jesus era, the Buddha era, the Lao Tzu era, things like that, and chat with some of those folks. So
yeah, amazing. Question number 3 is you being a longevity nut, and has nothing to do with longevity at all, but you probably live life with a certain degree of habits. What would you say is one of the vices that you currently have that you're like, you know what, every now and then I'll splurge on X?
Well, I've got a new way to cover my splurges. So I like pie. Growing up, my mother made amazing pies. She made them from scratch. And one of my favorites was apricot pie, fresh apricot pie. She was an amazing pie maker. And I've only tasted maybe one other pie that came close to what she would make. And so occasionally I will get a hankering for pie. But there is a new supplement out there that we take that's called sugar to fiber, rather, that will take about 50 to 90% of your intake of sugar and turn it into fiber and a bit of fructose. Wow. Fructose is not like the world's greatest sugar, if people know the whole physiology of fructose, but nonetheless, they've done studies showing that it can prevent blood pressure spikes and stuff like that. So if I am going to splurge, it's probably going to be something like that. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Question number 4 is, you've got a big mission of improving the life, the health, the quality of life with the people around the world.
That's right.
There's probably a lot of stresses that kind of come into the day-to-day of trying to perform that. What is your favorite way of de-stressing? Question.
For me, it's really boils down to a spiritual path. Moving into a space of what I call living an unencumbered life, where we all basically live in reactions to traumas that we've had in the past. Everybody's had traumas. I haven't met a person that hasn't, right? So everybody listening, you've all had your traumas, and we basically end up living in reaction to those. And then we create stories around those. And then those stories become our identities.
Mm,
and they start to define and limit us in terms of what we
mm.
think or how we go about things. And so being able to go back and actually heal those traumas, if you
Yeah.
will, is the first step. But then being able to transcend those traumas, which is kind of a spiritual path to transcendence, enables you to actually understand that everything that ever happened to you was really for your benefit. There is nothing bad that's ever happened to me in my life, although I've suffered what many people would call some bad things in my life. Um, but but in the end, when you transcend that and you realize that you are actually safe, most stress comes from not feeling safe, anger, stress, frustration, um, worry, fear, really all of them devolve down to lack of safety in my mind. And
Mm,
so if you find a way to give yourself both unconditional love and safety, all of a sudden you're able to remove yourself from the stresses of what happens. Everything now gets framed as an opportunity.
mm,
And there is really nothing that becomes threatening. And that's been my greatest asset in dealing with stress, is being able to transmute challenges, if you will, into opportunities, and then actually see a beauty behind all that. And as you kind of resonate around this greater sense of purpose, in this universal energy, all of a sudden things start unfolding, things happen. We meet each other, you meet other people, on, and the world just kind of flows forward. It's really quite a beautiful way, as opposed to trying to fight your way through everything, right? So,
mm.
yeah.
Well, those were meant to be short answers, but that's going to open things up because what you said there, we're going to unpack here because, you and I think both have the same philosophy of how we approach life, and the consciousness by which we approach life actually can be our medicine or poison. And
That's right.
so, but last question on the Five to Thrive,
Okay.
something super simple is you are at the end of your life 150 years, 200 years later, and you reflect back on a moment. What is that one special moment that has come up, that's coming up for you right now, if you were to put yourself in the future, that would just make you smile and be proud?
I would say it would have to be a moment of transcendence,
Mm,
because it's really from that place of, and I will tell you this, the path, we'll call it the path to enlightenment, right? I'm not going to stand here and say that I'm an enlightened being or that I'm whatever else. I find myself on that path, but I have moments, I have days maybe of being in an enlightened space. And what I've learned is that it's not a gradual process. You don't go from struggling to becoming transcendent as a stepwise thing. You don't work your way to get there. It actually, the work that you do creates a foundation, but when it happens in an instant. It
mm,
happens instantaneously, and you simply transcend. It's like a quantum leap in an electron going from one energy state to another energy state. It just moves to the next energy state. And so I think
mm,
the biggest smile would have to be, having experienced that, moving from one state into a different state, and then seeing the world through a completely different lens, and how that changed all the relationships, all of the opportunities, the beauty. I don't
mm.
know, everything changed in that moment. Everything changed in
Wow.
that moment. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. I can almost sort of like almost be in that moment with you
Yeah.
as a way of just recognizing that we are no longer us, but this one whole thing that's connected
Yes.
to each other, right?
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. Right.
Well, we definitely vibe on the same wavelength. 5 out of 5. You win the Five to Thrive, which means
Okay.
dinner the next time on me. So let's
Okay.
dive into it. You run what I consider probably one of the most robust longevity practices that are most comprehensive in terms of looking at different aspects. You've got, I've certainly been at different, clinics before where they're just doing hormones or peptides, and they've got a few biohacking things in the back. You really could kind of encompass all of it, particularly as you answered question 4 and 5. The spiritual aspect of your approach and philosophy to longevity is something that I resonate with as well.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I also find resonating, or at least mirroring, is our past. Both you and I are conventional medical doctors. Me trained as
Yeah.
an interventional radiologist. You were an interventional cardiologist. So tell
Hmm.
me how somebody goes from traditional medicine to what you're practicing now.
Yeah, and that's a great question. Well, I mean, I got sick is what happened. I was a busy interventional cardiologist. I had 10 offices, 12 doctors. I co-founded a heart hospital. I was involved with medical device companies. I had lots of things going on. I'm really kind of an entrepreneur at heart, is what it boils down to, that happens to be a physician as well. And, when I got sick and got tested, I was told, hey, you know what, this was in my early 50s, you're just getting older. Why don't you take an antidepressant? It was such an existential moment for me. If you want to talk about looking back, that was maybe one of the most existential moments in my life. There are probably three or four others, but that was incredibly depressing to think that it was all going to be downhill from here. And so when I realized that traditional medicine was failing me, then that caused me to actually look deeper into the whole functional space, age management space, integrative space. And 2.5 years later, I'd completely cracked the code for myself in terms of what was going on with genetics and the way I didn't methylate, the way I didn't convert inactive thyroid to active thyroid in my brain efficiently, that I was hormonally depleted, that I had actually subclinical hypothyroidism on top of that, that was only picked up with biometric testing. So once I started to feel great again, I couldn't go back to it. It's like, I can't go back to sick care. I can't go back to those conversations. I really want to help other people and enable other people to, what we call now, live young for a lifetime.
Yeah.
That's really what we want to do. And so when you think about that, it changes the trajectory of everything if you can be young, right? And so we can talk more about that, but that's kind of what got me to make the transition. And of course, when I did, and maybe it was a little bit like this for you too, but it was a little bit like base jumping, because I knew how to make a living as an interventional cardiologist, but I had no idea how to do it, in the longevity space where there isn't any insurance and there, lots of things. So it took a while to figure that out, but it was so worth it because, the work we get to do, the people we get to help, the stories that we hear from our clients, and the way we feel ourselves is just priceless. So we love it. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So I got a chance to review just the exercise facility. You guys got the ARX, you've got all the hot gadgets and you know all around, and you really do a 360 look at everyone that's there. I'm going to get into the
Yep.
spiritual aspect a little bit later because I know you dive into it, which is also a core tenet that I focus people on. But can
Yeah.
you review a little bit about what is what you're looking at? What are the different tests that are available
Yeah.
that people are looking at in their very first pass? Um, just so that they get an idea of just how comprehensive your clinic really is.
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple things that kind of fuel that. The first is that I think most people conceive of aging as a linear process, right?
Mhm.
Every year it's another year older, another birthday. I'm not that much different. I'm just kind of going along here. And they don't really understand that it's an exponential process. They don't understand that they're in an exponential game, even though they see it all around them, like people between 80 and 90 and 70 and 80 age so much more than 30 to 40 or 40 to 50. If we ask ourselves, what are you going to be like 10 years from now, 15 years from now, right? If I ask myself that, or if the audience asks yourself, what are you going to be like in 10 or 15 years? It's almost impossible to conceive of yourself as being much different than you are right now. And
Mm.
so we have no real touch to the fact that we're on an exponential declining course, that aging is an exponential impact. And there's good data that shows that aging is exponential. It has to do with the activation of the hallmarks of aging and how they interact with each other and accelerate the downward spiral. And so when I was working with this, I decided that, I started like most people did, learning about hormones or learning about this or telomeres or whatever else. But I quickly realized that there was a bigger picture going on here. And so I really broke it down into 4 areas that if someone is really going to live young for a lifetime, which is really what longevity is. Longevity itself even is an abstraction, right? What does that even mean? And so, but we know what it is to be young. So it's like, okay, well, let's get young, stay young, be young, and live young for a lifetime. So in order to do that, I think you really have to focus on 4 areas. And the first area is what I call life energy, which is the circle of spirituality, relationships, self-love, safety, things like that. The second one has to do with longevity itself. And those are really the drivers of aging. And I find that in most quote unquote longevity practices, they're doing things that make people feel better. They may be boosting testosterone or growth hormone or IGF-1, or they're taking supplements, or they're working some on autophagy, or they're, doing certain things, or doing intermittent fasting, using a sauna, all good things, but they're not really focused on creating an integrated strategy of measuring what is the activity that goes on with those actual hallmarks of aging, and how do we actually affect each one of those? Nobody's really playing that symphony, so to speak. And one of the things that we've learned is that there's a timing, a sequence, there's a frequency, intensity, and duration with which you activate certain parts of that circle, on that longevity circle. So it really is a symphonic sort of approach. So a lot of what we do is to help people understand where they are in the aging process relative to the drivers of aging itself. And then we have a health circle, which of course addresses every health concern that somebody might have. And then we have a performance circle. And the reason performance is there is this is also frequently overlooked, is that if you're going to be 30 years old and function like you're 30, then you need to be 30 now, right? And so if you're listening to this and you can't run down the stairs, and you can't go out and run 4 miles, or, ride your bike for 30 miles, or, go swim, or, go play basketball or whatever, then, you can tell yourself, you can kind of, I guess, kid yourself a little bit. Hey, I'm doing okay. I'm good for my age. I'm good relative to my peers, but you're actually acquiescing to the aging process and saying that. So training for performance becomes really important, because when you're 18 and you want to get in shape, you lift some weights and go for a run, you're pretty much good. When you're in your 30s, that starts to not work as well. In your 40s, it definitely doesn't work. In your 50s, it's certainly not working. And in your 60s, it's not working at all. You've got to train differently, right? And our concept of fit is to be fast, agile, strong, quick, balanced, with a great cardiovascular capacity and endurance, great flexibility and recovery. So if you're not training all those different elements, you're really not going to be able to be 30 years old. So it is a comprehensive view. It takes everything from mindset to performance to the drivers of aging, combines it with all the health things that most people are more familiar with. And it creates an environment that people really thrive in. So
your center is located in Dallas, Texas.
That's right.
And an exceptional center here. And I know the vision is really to go global. But at
That's
this
right.
time, how are you best seeing your patients? Are they flying into the center
Yeah.
and staying for a couple of days, or what's that look like for many people coming in?
Yeah. So for many people, people can engage with us based on the questions that they're asking, right? So one of the things I realize is that it's really important to understand what questions you are asking. So the questions we're asking are: how good can you be? How do you make 100 the new 30? How do you live well beyond 120? And how do you live young for a lifetime?
This episode of the Thrive State podcast is brought to you by the Thrive State Accelerator. The Thrive State Accelerator is actually a home course that I developed using the exact same techniques I work with my celebrity clients, CEOs, and executives on how to get them to the Thrive State. The Thrive State Accelerator teaches you how to master your 7 bioenergetic elements. That's sleep, nutrition, movement, stress and emotional mastery, relationships, our thoughts and mindset, as well as purpose. In this Thrive State Accelerator, you're also going to get a bonus module on optimization. That's how I talk about supplementation, peptides, all the optimization techniques I use with my clients to get them to the Thrive State. Now, for some of you who are just joining us for the first time, you guys might be wondering, what is the Thrive State? Well, the Thrive State is actually the energy, the epigenetic environment we give to ourselves, telling our DNA how to act and how to respond. And if we want optimal health, longevity, and peak performance, if we can master these 7 bioenergetic elements, our ability to have those 3 things that we just said, optimal health, longevity, and peak performance, is at its greatest. And it also prevents you from getting chronic symptoms like brain fog, being overweight, feeling sluggish, acne, pain, all these chronic symptoms, as well as preventing you from getting chronic disease. So getting to that Thrive State is really getting to that state to master being that very best version of yourself, so you could show up for you, for your family, for your business, everything that's important to you. So go ahead, check it out right now at kienvu.com/accelerator and use coupon code podcast25 for 25% off. Now back to the podcast.
So we have all the technologies that everybody else has, except we've got more of them than most people. But we're not married to any of the technologies. We're only married to the question. So we're constantly innovating, updating, adding new things, building new platforms, et cetera. So it's a very dynamic practice in that sense. So most people, if they're going to work with us, they do, if from out of town, they fly in and they spend 2 or 3 days with us doing all the baseline testing across those circles. And then we'll have results for them, some results for them before they go home, and get them started on a path. And then we like for them to come back in 6 or 8 weeks. There are Zoom calls in between that time, and really kind of go through everything, put all the cards on the table. Most people are playing a game and they don't know what game they're in, and they don't know what cards they're holding. So we understand the game that we're all in, and we also then understand the cards that they're holding. So all of a sudden, we're able to create an exponential strategy for an exponential problem, because biohacking and getting healthy is basically a linear response to an exponential problem, is what we've seen. So that's how we go about it. Yeah. And if somebody's asking the question, okay, well, what's my status? How young am I? Come in and work with us for a couple of days. We can give you a good read on that. We'll give you all the information, give you some pointers on where to go. If you're asking a bigger question, how do I live young? Come work with us for 6 months. It'll be transformative. And if your question is, how do I live young for a lifetime? Make me 30 again. I want to go all in on your IRB approved trials and all the hot research stuff that you can only get access to inside of research trials. Come join us for that, and we'll work with you, a year at a time. So,
what would be the typical age ranges of people coming into Gladden longevity?
Yeah, it's mid 30s to low 80s. Is kind of what we've seen. So I would say mid 30s to low 80s. Probably the majority of people are in their 50s or 60s. Reason being that they've had some event where they're starting to see their own mortality. Either they can't hit the golf ball as far or run as fast, or they're, whatever, feeling more fatigued or whatever it might be. I would say that happens, but other people come in when they're younger because they've had an event or because they have a family history of something, right? And so they're worried about this. It could be a neurodegenerative disease. It could be, osteoarthritis. It could be anything that runs in the family, or diabetes or obesity. We have world-class programs in basically treating obesity, getting people's body compositions back, retraining the whole brain and nervous system and gut to eat in a healthier way, et cetera. It's really quite phenomenal. So we'll work with anybody on the process that they need. It just depends on the question that they're asking. So.
Like I said, I've actually been, a concierge physician myself, and started to treat people. And people have asked me to become the medical director of many of the major longevity centers around the country. So I've got a chance to see a lot of different practices. And when I got a chance to meet you and know what you provide, I can honestly say for the listeners here that this is a very comprehensive program that is not matched by many clinics across the country, and so I don't usually give recommendations out for for clinics, but I can certainly recommend yours.
Appreciate
Now,
that.
before, yeah, you got it. You mentioned something, and we both vibe on this, and so I wanted to have this discussion with you. But, you know, we talk about how, as the human biological beings we are, we've got this nervous system that kind of keeps track of things, and this nervous system is pretty prehistoric system, that we got implanted with. And it's always looking for what's wrong and what can hurt us. And we basically have developed, and we live through life like that. They become the seat of our ego, maybe trying to find ways of staying safe and trying ways of getting love, which, like we said earlier, is something we actually already are.
That's
But
right.
if we're not aware of that, and we let the consciousness of this thing that's trying to keep us safe go on, I am believing that not waking up to that is a major driver for disease and early aging.
100%. I agree 100% with you.
And so for you, what was it? Was one of those existential crises just waking up from being sick for you? And what led you to sort of believe and come to that realization? I know for me, it was, yes, making the lifestyle changes that shifted things, but I have gone out of the countries and tried some plant medicines and whatnot, and that has
Sure.
really allowed me to wake up to certain things that I think now I
Yeah.
carry a different energy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, we have some commonality there too. So I think, for me, quite honestly, I think, I've been kind of a spiritual person my entire life. Like I remember walking down the street at 3 years old, coming back from the pond I used to play at a few blocks from my house, actually debating the existence of God. And I was like, I don't know, I could see it this way or I could see it that way. And I don't know, I've just always had a bent toward kind of spiritual things. And I actually went to seminary for a couple of quarters to try that on to see if maybe that was a good fit for me. I decided it was something I could always do, but to do medicine, you really needed to go to medical school. And so I kind of moved away from it. And I think the way that I've gotten back to it really is through healing psychological wounds. So
Yes.
I ended up choosing to marry a couple of people that didn't work out. And so the question was not what's wrong with them. The question was, why am I choosing these people? Right? Why am I choosing these people? And so, I think if you've had something in your life that's gone wrong, it's easy to blame somebody else. I think the first step is to actually say, okay, what am I bringing to the party? What's going on with me? Why am I choosing these people, or why am I showing up in the way that I'm showing up? And that was really the nidus for me of starting to unravel the knot of the traumas that I'd actually had and being able to actually solve those traumas. And that took a number of years, quite honestly, to work through that. But when you get through figuring that out, you then sort of start to develop this substrate for, okay, well, what's next? Is there a higher way that we can live, right? And is there,
Yeah.
if we're going to be our unencumbered selves, we're no longer encumbered by the amygdala, right? This fear response to everything, and now we're free to be ourselves, which is really a beautiful way to live. And then it becomes a question of, okay, well, then how do I actually even enhance that further? And that's kind of the spiritual question, this sense of what I call energetic resonance with the universe, this greater sense of purpose,
Yeah.
and these kinds of things. And I think different conversations, different experiences, meditation, some pharmacology has come into play as well in terms of opening up new horizons of healing some things and seeing what's possible. I think all of that, and meeting some really profound people that were very, very spiritually connected, that could, when you were in their presence, it's all of a sudden like, ooh, you're literally on a different planet. I mean, it's remarkable. And just understanding that this was really possible. All of those things contributed, quite honestly.
Yeah. And I look at this now, if we take a look at our human body, Fortunately for every single, organ, or every single cell in our body, there is no amygdala there. There's certainly a consciousness there, but there's no amygdala. And the
Yeah,
best way for us to achieve longevity and peak performance is for every single cell to just do their thing that they
that's
were
it.
designed to do, but connected to something big, much, much bigger. And for us,
That's
that's
right.
us as one human body. But every single cell needs to do that. Now,
Yeah,
if these cells just start worrying about themselves in their own fear and danger,
yeah,
and just wants to collect a massive amount of things for themselves, well, we have a condition of that actually in the body, and that's called cancer. When
yeah,
cells go rogue, or when they decide not to do their thing and become something else, that's
that's right.
dysplasia or metaplasia. And so
Yeah,
we become a cancer when that's the case. And if we could start looking at the universe and the world and humanity being an entire organism, and just see the analogy of the beauty of life that is all the organisms that are out there,
yeah,
that if we could start to see not us as one particular person that needs to grow for itself, but one expression that we are connected to this much, much bigger thing, and that we are safe. And if we just show up as us to contribute to this much bigger thing, that's really what life is, which is
exactly.
what your aha moment when you answered question number 4.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I really think that a lot of longevity, if you will, health optimization, performance optimization is a function of brain reprogramming.
Yeah.
So our brains, as I said, we're living in reaction to traumas. We've created stories and identities, et cetera, around all that. And it's tough to go back and reprogram that stuff, right? I mean, you start by actually understanding what's the software that's running, but understanding the software that's running is not enough to reprogram it, right? So you can work with a therapist and say, okay, I get it. This happened, now I'm doing this. It doesn't mean you can stop doing it or that you can change the internal messaging, right? So then you start to move into these other areas where it's like, okay, well, actually, how do I heal this? How do I understand this on a deeper level, right? And so, if you ask these questions, you'll find the answers. In fact, one of the things about life is that you only get the answers to the questions that you're asking.
Mhm.
So it pays to ask the right questions and to go deeper and deeper into this. And the reason that it becomes so valuable to you is if you're going to live 30 for a long time, for decades to come. An interesting thing is that our impact on the planet, our ability to have an impact goes up exponentially every decade, right? Until our health fails, and then our impact starts to crater. But if
Yeah.
you're living young for a lifetime, your impact can go up for decades and decades, right? So the return on investment of what you invest in yourself is an exponential return. And this becomes what I call a trajectory of greatness, where you're actually now making a bigger impact on the planet, your passion about who you love, who you want to be with, what you want to accomplish, all that stuff comes forward, but it's all predicated on actually seeing the world through a completely different set of eyes.
Yeah.
That's what I call being your unencumbered self, to where you can actually do this, right? Otherwise,
Mm.
it's tough. And to your point, the body, the poor cells down in your bones or your hip or your shoulder or your stomach or whatever it is, when all that fear is running, that fear
Mhm.
gets, now that all those cells are living in a fear environment, even though they
Yeah.
may not be fearful of them, they don't have the amygdala, but they have all those fear hormones and all those fear
Yeah.
responses and
Yeah.
sympathetic nervous system drive and all those things that are actually so stressful to them. And so if you really want to be healthy, I think starting with your own mindset of, why am I here? What am I doing? What am I living in reaction to? How do I actually solve some of these problems? Because quite honestly, you can throw all the biochemistry in the world at somebody. If they
Yeah.
don't have this stuff figured out, they'll self-sabotage. They go back to drinking. They, do whatever they're going to do. Right.
No, absolutely. It's recognizing that unless we solve for the consciousness of we're in danger to we're really safe, because you're giving your cells completely different messages. You know,
Mhm.
the danger message increases inflammation in the body. It decreases our immune system in their body because of
Yep.
the energetics we give it. And which is why I talk about the bioenergetic state so much. And this is why
Yeah.
I find it so important to monitor our states and
Mhm.
and know which consciousness we live in.
Yeah.
All
Rightly so.
this great stuff, which is why I find, because you think that way, it's really a necessary conversation to have in the human performance and longevity space. And guess what's up? How does that have to do with performance? Well, that default mode network, where a lot of these traumas and stuff are attached to, um, if you don't quiet that thing down, it actually blocks people from dropping into flow states, which is actually a state of high performance as well.
100%.
So,
100%. Yeah. In fact, in our performance circle, at the top of the circle is flow state,
mm,
because flow states are one of the most satisfying conditions for humans, right? And flow states are when you've really, quite honestly, quieted the frontal lobes, the
yeah,
thinking, the amygdala, they've been
yeah,
quieted. And now
yeah,
the brain, if you're familiar with EEGs, as I'm sure you probably are, you've
yeah,
got all the different waveforms. I won't go through them
yeah,
right now, but at the highest end is gamma. And when you're in a flow state, you're running in gamma. And so I use a device called Brain Tap that I know you're
yeah.
familiar with. And now I'm exercising on my Vasper, wearing Brain Tap with my brain in gamma, which puts me into a flow state. And I went for a run this morning, and I've been doing it now for the last few weeks. And now when I engage in an activity, my brain automatically goes to gamma. It's like
Oh,
its default is to go straight to gamma because I've been training it and entraining it to go into gamma when I'm exercising.
wow,
So
amazing.
there's all these really cool hacks that you can do to actually get into flow states and make all this work. But again, you just have to be asking the question, how do I get there? If you ask the right questions, you'll get the solutions. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing stuff. So, how do people find out more about your clinic and more about the work that you do?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So the website, Gladden Longevity, you can find information there. You can reach out, and if you just reach out through the website, we'll get back to you and find out what questions you're asking, and then build out a program that's right for you. Essentially, is how that works. We also have a podcast, the Gladden Longevity Podcast. And we've been doing that for a number of years now. A lot of really interesting guests, a lot of really interesting topics. So if you're interested to check that out, feel free to do that. There's some social media accounts out there and things like that, but really the best way to contact us would be through the website, and you can get a lot more stuff as well on the podcast. So.
Well, I have an idea of what this might be, what your answer might be for this very last question. But, with everything that you have experienced, I mean, you went through traditional medicines, all these biohacking gadgets, spirituality. What has been your best medicine?
Well, there's probably a couple of answers to that. You can't get away from, healing old traumas and things like that. There's no doubt that this transcendent space is got to be right up there in the top few. For me too, there were some genetic abnormalities, right? So when I was hormonally depleted and had subclinical hypothyroidism, those were a big deal. I felt terrible, and I felt
Mm,
terrible until I got those fixed. So actually getting my genetics done and actually understanding what cards I was holding when it came to a number of different things, and finding out that I had cards I didn't know I had, and
mm,
I had vulnerabilities I didn't know I had, and I had assets that I didn't know I had. But understanding the cards I was holding became very, very powerful. And so I would say, doing some of the things around that. And then I would say the third thing would be learning to ask the right questions. Like as a cardiologist, and I'm sure as a radiologist, right? You have a certain set of questions. You come to see me, are you having chest pain? Are you having palpitations? You're short of breath, blah, blah, blah. And those are the questions that you ask. But now we're asking bigger questions. We're asking each client, where would you like to go with your life? What does great look like for you? Right? What does it mean for you to live to be 100 years old or 120 or 150? What do you want to look like? What do you want to do? What do you want to accomplish? And when you start to ask bigger questions and people start to ask bigger questions themselves, it's really interesting the progress that they could make. And I think that's one of the joys, is enabling people, right, to get on this trajectory of greatness for their life. So, yeah.
Dr. Gladden, I thank you so much for your wisdom and congratulate you on building such a comprehensive and robust longevity center. I want to send people there. It's gladdenlongevity.com is their website. He mentioned BrainTap. In fact, the listeners here can get a special discount on BrainTap using the code Thrive State. Dr. Gladden, thank you for
Beautiful.
being on the Thrive State podcast.
Oh, Kien, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Thrive State podcast. And if this podcast is bringing a lot of value to you, if you find that your life is just improving with this podcast, that your life is getting to the next level, please consider supporting it. And here's a few ways you can do so. You can do so by liking this video and commenting on this video, and also sharing this video with your friends and family. Another thing you can do is go to ratethispodcast.com/ThriveState. Go ahead and leave us a 5-star review there. It will really, really help this show grow. And this will give me more time so that I could actually give more content to you, just like you got in this episode. And if you haven't already picked up a copy of my book, Thrive State, Your Blueprint for Optimal Health, Longevity, and Peak Performance, you can pick it up now. It became a #1 new release in longevity. Go to thrivestatebook.com. And if you enjoy the book, please consider leaving us a review as well. And the last thing you can do, if you're liking everything here and you want to work more closely with me as well as my team to get you into the Thrive State, go to kienvu.com/accelerator and consider joining the home course, the Thrive State Accelerator. It's really the course that I use. It's the concepts that I use personally when I work with CEOs, celebrities, and my high-profile clients to get them to the Thrive State. Again, the Thrive State Accelerator at kienvu.com/accelerator. And because you're a listener of this podcast, I want you to save 25% by using the coupon code podcast25. I hope we continue to give value to you. And remember always, you are your best medicine.